Hi guys, it's Blackie for Shaman's Forge Bushcraft. Today I want to talk to you about something that I think is almost a forgotten thing in bushcraft, the pocket knife. Now I know all of us have grown up with pocket knives, and you may even have one hanging on your belt. But I'd like to bring up some points, maybe better explain the uses and functions of a pocket knife. Now the first pocket knives are probably flint blades that were knocked off spawls that were wrapped up in fur, carried with you, and just made a good, quick, handy small tool for that little bit of work where you don't need a big knife to do it. Small knives do small jobs well. Big knives do big jobs well. And there's a transition between a belt knife and the small knife. And when you look at Nesmunk had his double bit axe, he had his famous knife, and he also carried a 3-blade Stockman. I'll get to why he did that in just a second. But to begin with, let's look at the old design of knives. Now, one of the oldest designs is a friction knife. Now, this is an open L, but a friction knife is simply a metal blade with a hole in it put into some sort of handle. Usually it's made out of horn, wood, metal, ceramic, something. The object of the game is bone. Bone was very popular. Is a way to keep the sharp edge from cutting you and still be able to put it in a pocket or hanging around a neck or have it handy, and yet, be able to get to it quickly. That's the idea. Now this style of knife is also called a peasant's knife. It goes all the way back to the Roman Empire that we can document them, where it was simply a broken, larger knife. It was a broken sword tip. It was a broken, piece of a farm tool or whatever. Metal was precious. You didn't waste it. And this metal was then pinned to a bone, wood, whatever handle, sometimes even leather, thick leather, and secured to carry on the person. If I was to hand this knife to a Roman soldier, he would know what it was. I wouldn't have to explain its operation. Now this particular knife is an open L, made in France. You're all familiar with them, and they're good knives. They are good knives. They're not good choppers. Note that it's a knife. It's for cutting. The blades are thin. The blades are tapered front to back like a Scandi grind with just a small after bevel. It makes a really good slicing, cutting knife. This is not a chopping knife. That's not what this is for. This is a cutting knife. Just like you don't take a eye scalpel and try to cut down a tree with it. This is for precision cutting. And this is a better knife whenever you're trying to cut up meat, processed vegetables, or something like that. That's what this knife is really good for. This style has been around a long time. Okay, now the father of what we would think of being the modern knife actually comes from the 1600s, late 1600s, in the research that I found, and it will probably kind of surprise you. A Barlow. We can document Barlow making this style of knife where it was metal springs, brass bolster so the springs could move, and some sort of handle material, horn, bone, something like that. Normally it was a single blade. Later it started getting 2 blades, and that's where began the idea of a pocket knife being a multi-function tool. Now, this one has a clip point blade. That style of blade descends directly from sword tips and things like that. It does a good job at piercing in and general cutting tasks. It's a pierce cut blade. You can also do small work with it, and that little fine tip allows you to dig into things, to pick, or to slice in or separate, like nutshells and things like that. That's what that blade is for. The other little blade on here is a little blade. Now today we call it the small blade or whatever. This is a penknife blade, meaning literally what this style of blade was designed for. Cutting bird quills to make a writing pen. Gentlemen would carry knives that had just this small blade, and it was called a penknife. If you ever look at calligraphy, originally it was made out of taking bird quills, goose quills, whatever, and carving the end of the quill to actually write different forms. That's what that little blade was for. And there were schools that were taught in writing and etc. on how to carve these little things. So that's what that precision little blade was good for. It was also very good for getting that little splinter out of you and for precise little work. That was the carving knife, also used for a lot of whittling. And many men over the generations used pocket knives for whittling, making useful little items. They weren't in a big hurry, but they sat there and carved it and shaped it. Spoons, hanging hooks, you know, little figures for their kids, whatever. It was a way to pass time when you didn't have internet. It was a way to carve and do things, and that's what these little blades and this blade was good for. But this Barlow knife, this design, these reinforced metal bolsters with these slab, horn, hardwood, something handles, and these brass separation bolsters, liners, allowed the spring to work independently. And that's when you open a blade, it would let off tension and then lock it back in. This does not lock. It simply opens and holds it so the blade doesn't flop. Now with that open L, with the original knives, they didn't have this collar. This collar is a modern thing, and once you open it, them blades could flop. Once it got a little worn in it, they'd flop. So they had all kinds of innovative ways to try to lock it. Now, what Open L came up with is this collar that you rotate that transforms it from being a folding knife and click, now it's a fixed blade knife, and it won't close on your hand. With these small pocket knives like this, they will close, and so you've got to be careful because it'll just snap closed if you bear down and go up. Okay? Now, from this design, we came into a god-awful amount of specialty designs, and they were the multi-tools of the day. You've heard of a jackknife. Well, a jackknife was a jack of all trades. It had 3 different kind of blades on it, or 4. If it's got 4 small blades on it, it's called a congress. If it's got 2 blades on opposite end that are small and pointy, they're called a bushcraft. Each of these designs developed for a specific thing. And these today are the 2 most common you're going to encounter. A 3-blade Stockman and a trapper. Now let's start with the 3-blade Stockman. If you do a search for pocket knives of these traditional style, you're going to find a pile of these 3-blade trappers. 3-blade Stockmans. Sometimes 4 blades, sometimes up to 5 or 6. But the most common is 3-blade. This was a farmer's knife because you had a clip point, remember, for piercing and general cutting. Then it had 2 specialty blades. It had a little penknife blade, same thing, and it was the perfect little bitty one for getting splinters out or doing small detail work, which is necessary a lot in farming and stuff like that, especially whenever you're trying to work with horse tack. You could use it like a little awl to cut a hole into heavy saddle harnesses, things like that. That's what that type of blade was good for. Now, some of these have an actual awl on it for cutting into heavy, or it had a marlin-like spike on it, and that was for picking apart ropes and things like that. Again, depending on what your job was and what you wanted was the kind of knife you carried. The 3-blade Stockman also typically carries a unique little blade called a Spade Blade, S-P-E-Y. Now, and I will have at the end of this video, I'll have independent pictures of all of this so you can look a little closer. This is a Spade Blade. It's got this funny little downturn at the end, and it's dull, it's thick all the way out here to the end with a very good edge. That's because it's for pushing down and sliding into something. The blunt tip does not dig in, but the skin or whatever would ride up and over. You've heard the term spay and neuter your animals? Spade blade. That's what this was used for in farming, cutting animals. For cutting and neutering and etc. farm animals. It was also used for notching ears, cutting that little bitty split out of a sheep or goat's hoof. You'll also see a blade that rolls down that's called a sheep's foot. I think I got one of those as well. Yes, this rolls all the way down and it's called a sheep's foot. And of course it was used for that. It was also a good one for notching ears. Before the days of these modern tags, farmers would quite often into the ears or sometimes even the nose of their livestock, they'd carve notches so it would leave a scar and you could identify the animal absolutely that was your animal. So The 3-blade Stockman was anyone who was farming and had livestock. Stockman, livestock knife. The other one is a 2-blade knife called a trapper. Now, there are variations of this knife, but it has a long clip point, again for piercing and general cutting. And then back here on the back, it has a long spade blade. Now look how long that blade is. This was for skinning and processing game animals. A trapper traps for fur. So this is a skinning, butchering, processing knife. That spade blade would not dig in going across underneath the skin. So I took my piercing blade, my clip point, and I made a little hole, and I stuck my spade blade in and opened him up like a zipper. And the fur would roll up onto that razor sharp blade, and as I went along like that, it would just roll off and unzip him. This is how you process. It was also good for processing game, cutting meat, because, as you know, on the top of a butcher knife, you got that funny little thing that also does good at cutting through meat. That's what that was for. That's a butchering blade, processing blade, and also does pretty good at filleting the small. Now, variations of this knife. If it has a hook instead of a spade blade, that's a bird knife. That was for going up and getting the guts and pulling out of a bird or livestock, chickens or whatever. If it had a serrated edge that was not sharp, that's a fish knife. And it had a fish hook notch for going down and getting the hook out of the fish and scaling the fish. Quite often the clip point would be replaced by a blade that rolled up to a point and was a fillet blade, so it would be a fish knife. Variations of this 2-blade or even up to 3-blade did different jobs. Now, this is a case 2X trapper knife. Now notice it's a bit bigger than this. This was meant for doing a bigger job. You had, again, clip point, and you had a big old round tip spade blade. Sometimes you find these that had a 3rd blade in here, a saw blade. Now that was for butchering big animals, because what you did was you opened them up and then you brought out the saw blade and you cut the rib cage, you cut the sternum, things like that, for butchering like a hog, making a half of a hog, for butchering cows, deer, whatever. When people butchered their own meat, that's what that was for. You'll also find these trappers that have 2 sharp pointed blades instead of a spade blade. That's called a hunter. And that was because hunters that hunted big game like moose, elk, and things like that, they don't take the whole carcass. They go up and they take shoulders and hams and the big hunks of meat, and they need 2 sharp-edged blades that could cut quickly, take off big hunks of meat, and then leave the rest for the wolves. Plus, like a lot of you guys out west know, or in Alaska, when you shoot a big game animal out there, you've attracted every large predator in the territory. You better process them and get gone. Or you may have a grizzly rolling up in a few minutes wanting buffet. So, the object of the game here is use that to process them. Now, these 2 style of knives will do the bulk of what you're going to need in field work today in bushcraft, as far as processing your game, of whittling, of making, notch sticks and traps and things like that. This does not take the place of the big belt knife. The belt knife is used for big jobs, preparing kindling, making feather sticks, fire building, shelter building, things like that. And this is the delicate. And if you look at Nesmunk, he had his double bit axe for 2 kinds of chopping. He had his belt knife, and then he had a 3-blade Stockman, very similar to this. And the object of that game was this performed all the functions that the other 2 did not. And therefore, he was well covered. I would not want to have to build a shelter with one of these. I'd do it if I had to. But I wouldn't want to try to fillet a mess of brim with a 10-inch blade either. It's a lot of work. The big blade becomes awkward. Something small, I can just go zip, zip, zip. You ever tried to skin a squirrel with a cold steel Trailmaster? It's a lot of work. This makes it easy. That's what this job is for. Now, not long after the Barlow and these friction knives, had been around forever, somebody came up with an idea of locking that blade in a bigger knife. And that's where this style of knife. Now this is a reproduction of a French trade pattern, mid-1700s lock back knife. It's got a ring up here because it hooks to the actual spring in the back of the knife. That way when the knife comes up, click, it locks. Now it's a fixed blade knife and it don't bend. To close it, I grab that spring and pull, and it will close. Now, just by lifting that up, I can close it. Now, what most guys did with these was they would hook that ring and just put the back edge of the knife in my hand like that, grab the ring and go and break it. This is a lock back. This was a real innovation because now I had a blade that could lock and not fold on me, and it became a true fixed blade knife, and I could do my work without worried about that blade closing up on my hand. This was an innovation. Now, modern times, lock back. Now the release is back here and easier to open, but it locks. Now it's a fixed blade knife that I simply squeeze and close. These are very popular. Now this was mine. This is the one that I carried from the time I was 8 years old to the time I was 28 years old. A near and dear friend. And because of that, I can tell you that these knives are great for piercing, for cutting, for minor cutting tasks. I can also tell you that this is not a good skinning knife. This is not a good fillet knife. This is not a good knife for processing game. I can skin with it, but it's a lot of work because I have to lift the hide up, stick my finger in there, and hold it up and do like that as I use my finger. A spade blade would just go and run right through it. Or a good butcher knife would do the same thing. But this was a good general purpose carrying knife. It does a lot of jobs. It does a lot of jobs well. But this is a carrying knife for sticking, etc. Now, in modern times, you know, a lot of guys carry now. Some small little lock back like this with a clip on it. They slide it in the belt, and it's got a thumb to open it up. It's got serrations on it, and some sort of tanto point, needle point, spear point, or like this. This is a spear, sort of a spear clip. Serrations cut anything, but they don't cut anything cleanly. They're soft, basically like a serrated steak knife. And so if something's wet, a slick blade, a straight edge, kind of wants to slide on it. This will bite into it and cut. So for cutting nylon, for cutting dense rope, something wet, that's better. That has an advantage. But it don't cut anything cleanly. That's what the smooth edge is for. If you're trying to make a clean cut, you want a smooth edge. But these are probably the most carried knives today as far as a utility knife. For the most part, they're a general purpose knife that's straight cutting. They're not a good skinning knife because that clip point digs in if you try to push it. You don't want that. You can't get it to do a lot of the precise work, but it's a good general purpose knife. So if you're going to carry one of these, it's a good knife. But just remember what these blades are for and these others. And if you're looking for a add-on to put into your carry kit, I would recommend one of the Stockman or Trappers for game processing, to have an extra thing. Do like Nesmunk, throw it in your EDC bag, throw it in your haversack. Carry one of these for general purpose. You know, I need to notch something, whatever. They can be good. But the blade designs of those 3 blades and 2 blades will beat it for precision carving, for precision work. I wouldn't want to have to dig a fish hook out of myself with this. Now that little penknife blade, I could press in there beside it and get it out and do very little damage to me. This, I'd make a much bigger hole if I had to dig a hook or something out of me. I'd rather have a scalpel. Now, one other style I want to speak about, actually 2. Sometime in the early 1900s, there was a split from these knives that had multiple blades and everything else till you get another type of blade that pops up, and the common name for it back then was a camp blade or camping blade, and that's a Swiss Army knife today, or sack, and it's got multiple tools. We know what that is, and this is just a multi-tool with a blade in it. Now these were predominantly used for camping because it had a can opener, it had a bottle opener, common way to open food utensils, and you see them in a lot of camping sets, both commercially produced and that people bought for themselves in those days. This type of knife became popular during the Depression, and actually a pretty good bit before it. It was called a hobo. It's just simply a knife with a spoon on it and a fork. This one was very inexpensive. It's got a little fork and a can opener in it, a bottle opener, and a knife blade. A lot of the guys carry these in their haversacks packs because it served a purpose. One, it's my eating utensils, and they're made out of metal, so I could put them in boiling water and sterilize them if they got a little dirty. I can also scrub them with sand to get crud off of it, and then stir it up in some boiling water a minute and sterile. Most of these you find are all metal construction, so you could submerge it. The military looked at these for quite a while, but they're called camping knives, and that's what you see with the Swiss Army knives and these spoon type knives and other ones, is their job was to be a knife when I'm coming out here to do something camping. You know, I would have the tools in my pocket that were necessary to do the job. Now, the last type I'd like to talk about is a relatively modern incursion. I'd say in the last 20 years. And although most people are not going to think of it as a knife, it is. It is the outgrowth of the Swiss Army knife, of the camp knife, and stuff like that. And it all started with this. Just a little leather pouch. This is one of the originals from 80 something. A Leatherman tool. Pair of pliers. With a file and all the usual, and a blade. Not a great blade, but a blade. And this became the outgrowth of this. Now you've got a tool that you could carry in your pocket that was very useful. It was pliers, it was screwdrivers, it was whatever. You could pull out, and this was small enough, although it did come with this rather spiffy little leather belt pouch. It was small enough you could put it in just your pocket, and it wasn't much bigger than a Swiss Army knife in size and weight and thickness. And guys carried these as a pocket knife. And in time these grew. Well, I need more, until today, when you go to get one, you're going to get something like this. They almost always have to be in a carry pouch, and it's some sort of big old tool set with files and, you know, saws and 5 kinds of screwdrivers and etc. This constitutes what many people consider a pocket knife. It's the only blade they carry. They carry all these tools too, but the blade is now moved back from the time when these 3-blade Stockmans were state of the art to where this is now. So today it would be a little clip knife or a Leatherman tool of some kind. Is probably the everyday carry of the bulk of people out there today. Now, they do a good job. These little clip knives are very handy in our urban setting for popping it open, cutting that bag, opening up that lunch thing, getting that CD out of the wrapper, whatever. This knife is very handy, quick, thin, convenient, cheap, effective. And you don't have to spend a lot of money. You can buy a real expensive knife if you want to. But it serves the purpose today in our urban, you know, computer world that this does. This does the job also of what the Swiss Army knife and stuff did, of being out there and being able to take apart the little thing and puts the screw onto the mailbox, and, you know, that's stuck, I need to get it out of there. This would be the equivalent of the modern pocket knife today, because it does have a blade in it. It does have a saw blade in it. It does have a knife blade in it right there, and it'll do for your general cutting. A lot of these have 2 or 3. Now the one that Dave Canterbury just brought out has got a fillet knife in his. So you're trying to get this to do what the trapper did and be a game processor. This is not a game processor. This is an urban tool. There are not many screws on trees. This is good for repairing your gear and maintaining your gear. And although many people carry it as a pocket knife, this is not a pocket knife. It's a tool that we just carry. When we go to the field to do our bushcraft and our woods work, and we're preparing and doing our stuff, you have to ask yourself, what job am I going to be doing? The most useful tool on this Leatherman in the field is the pliers. For pulling things out of the fire, or clamping something down, or pulling something tight, or whatever. Pliers. For an everyday pocket knife in the field, a 3-blade Stockman or a Trapper will do the job the best, in my humble opinion. Not trying to step on anybody's toes. Notice I hadn't said any name brand great ones. It's your personal choice. But for me to come out here, and what am I doing? I'm going to be processing game, small game mostly, which is going to be birds, squirrels, rabbit, fish. My Trapper rides on my belt. This is a Saber Knife, number, what was it, 614? Yeah, 614. This was a $5 knife in 1950s America, made in Japan. This is a high quality carbon steel blade. The thing is 50 years old. It is sharp as you want anything. This is also a 1950s 3-blade Stockman that has still got such good springs, it snaps. Holds an edge like you wouldn't believe. And this was considered the cheap knife back in the day when people carried these knives. This was considered the junk knife you gave your kid for a starting knife. The quality of these knives was good. Finding older antique knives, old Case knives. Case is about the only American company that today that I consider still have really high quality. Good blades, are bulletproof. If I was going to recommend a cheaper knife for you to look for on the internet, I would honestly have to say, if money's an issue, look at Rough Rider. They're a Chinese-made company, but they make a really high-quality knife, and it's good. The fit, the finish, the everything is. You do your own search on YouTube, you'll find out. Am I saying it's better in the Case? No, I'm not. I would always prefer to buy American, if at all possible. But at the same time, if money is the problem, and you want a good knife, find the best quality knife you can find for the price you can afford. And get the knife you need for what you're doing. If you're just going out in the woods and doing your stuff and not skinning any game, not fishing or hunting, took that lock back. It's just a fine cutter. I can notch and do things with it. If you're processing game, I recommend a 3-blade Stockman or a Trapper. That's my humble opinion, guys. Well, I hope this opens your eyes and gives you some ideas. And please comment, tell me what you think. I love to hear from you, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Till next time, guys, I'm Blackie for Shaman's Forge Bushcraft, wishing you safe journeys and have a great day.